Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals on what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earle. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsintensive.com. In today's interview, I interview my grandpa, Dr. Ralph Earle. Dr. Earle is a noted family therapist, psychologist, author, and lecturer. He is past national president of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy and is an approved supervisor for the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. He is a national authority on sexual addiction with over 50 years' experience working with sexual problems and works extensively with sex offenders. Dr. Earle is an ordained minister and served on the board of directors of the Interfaith Sexual Trauma Institute of St. John University, Minneapolis. Lastly, he's the founder and president of Psychological Counseling Services in Scottsdale, Arizona. So without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Ralph Earle. Okay.
Teaching people to change.
Okay, so we're recording now. So welcome again to the podcast, Cuckoo. It's nice to have you on. And we were just talking about hopping into the interview, and you were saying maybe not a possibility for you at this moment.
Well, at 86, I'm not hopping much, but it reminded me of your dad, Marcus Earle, who when he was a little kid. He did not have to skip, and so I remember. I don't remember how we taught him, or he learned how to skip, and that was a major triumph in very therapeutic for Marcus right then, and for Dad and Mom that Marcus knew how to skip.
That's good. I don't know if I've seen him skip. I'll have to ask him next time we're together.
If he's not able to, don't tell Mama or me, because we wouldn't want to know that he regressed. Okay.
Okay. Well, I was thinking in this episode I could, ask you some questions, a bit of reflection on your career. I mean, you just recently retired, and I think first I want to start with asking, how many years did you practice at PCS?
At PCS?
Yeah.
49, going almost 50 now, 49 years plus.
Wow. So you founded PCS, and it's been such a great team of therapists over the years who have made PCS what it was. And my first curiosity is, like, with being a part of this group for so long, what do you view as like the spirit of PCS? Like, what are like the values? Like, what holds that group together and makes it what it is?
Well, Andrew, I love the word values. That was definitely one of the things, both in terms of values for PCS, for Mama, your grandma and I, when we started it, and all the way through, understanding our values as clinicians and helping patients to figure out their own, to have value clarification. It is right at the center of what PCS is all about. So that if the values are different between the client that we're seeing and our values, our job isn't to say, well, you have the wrong values. Our values are what you should have. But that word is absolutely one of my favorite, and for the 49 years of PCS has been a core deal, is to help us to have, we're treating, to have similar values, so we're in the same area, not at conflict about values. And then there's no greater way to describe what I think we try to help clients to do, and that is to figure out what their values down deep are, so that they can be true to themselves, even if it's different than what would be true to us or our values.
Oh, I love what you're saying there, because psychotherapy is such a parallel process, isn't it? That it's important for therapists have values, and develop values, and then I'm hearing we're supporting clients and getting in touch with what are their core values and honoring their own values, right? Not imposing your values as a therapist on your client, but honoring their development of what's important to them and how do they want to show up in the world.
Yeah, Andrew, that's core. When I think about the 49 years when I started out, a lot of that was not so clear in terms of ethics of professional associations. In my case, and in your dad's case, as a psychologist and marriage and family therapist or couples therapist, the values, a lot of things have been clarified and become codified in ethics that were not true at all 49 years ago. And a big part of that is to whether it's gender identification or uh, dealing with cultural differences. When I started out, there was no training about being really sensitive to cultures. The gender identification thing had not been worked out much at all. And we've got a long way to go in these areas still. But what has happened is to make sure if there's a difference in values, that we help people to be true to themselves down deep. And one of the things about PCS is we do intensive therapy. So we may do 69 hours in one week and try to help and may have 8 or 9 different therapists or more involved in the process to help that person to find out how he or she can be true to themselves. And it's an incredible job. I, as you said, I retired. I'm not seeing clients or patients now at PCS. And by the way, I'm loving retirement. I'm loving retirement, and I the part that really turned me on, and I would hope for all PCS therapists and therapists outside of PCS, is to have a congruence so that the listening that goes on helps to validate the person, internal validation that's congruent with that person. And we've learned a lot over the years. What not to do, uh, like if it happens to be the person, it's not about being a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. It's not about any particular gender. This is the way it should be. And that openness is an exciting process for a therapist. Unless the therapist is open, it doesn't work out well. And so it's a challenge to the therapist to be true to the task of being a therapist and not a preacher or an evangelist for something. So it's an exciting field. And I more than ever, Andrew, uh, I love the field of the mental health world, of the field of counseling and psychology, because it's a hell of a good deal for the therapist as well as for the client.
Yeah. And I'm hearing there that one of these core values of PCS is this openness, just this openness and acceptance of clients as they are, and not being hyper focused on an agenda of any sort, but really meeting the person where they're at.
That's a beautiful way to say it, because I think the agenda is written. The agenda uh, is written or are written, if there are multiple, which there are, by the client, not the therapist. And so it's an incredibly challenge. I know that in seeing patients, for me as an older man, it was, as far as keeping my mind engaged, and good deal for me. But if a therapist's mind is engaged in listening deep in terms of helping that person to be to feel more authentic or to be more real to himself or herself, then it goes sideways. And one of my pet peeves, by the way, thanks for asking, Andrew, is people who have an agenda, whether it's a religious agenda or a political agenda or whatever, and try to, and that's still, I think that's going on less than it used to go on in the therapy world. However, it still goes on. So for clients, if anybody goes to see a therapist and recognizes, hey, this person's trying to me to be like he is, or she is, or they are, whatever we're going to say. That that this is not a healthy deal for me because the person's not helping me to be who I am down deep.
Yeah. I know that you're familiar with internal family systems, and I think you know that I've been studying it pretty extensively recently. And there's this concept of capital S self, that's God within, and one of the principles of self energy is that it doesn't have an agenda, right? So it is it when we're in that place as clinicians or just people in relationships, we are just like you're talking about. It's just this active listening, very engaged listening to understand that person across from us and what's important to them, and to support them in their own healing journey. So I think that there's such power when we can, because I find myself all the time with my wife, with my friends, just I've got something going on in the back of my head as we're talking. Oh, I want to share this idea. And I think, as therapists, we often, do that at times too, but just the power of really trying to understand what the person across from us is saying it's huge.
Well, Andrew, yes, I'm aware. Your dad has told me about the training and the work you're doing in internal family systems, or IFS. I that's my at the moment. I've gone through a lot of different moments of aha experiences. There's no, for me, no better uh, way to learn, both as a therapist and as a client of listeners now, to understand the various parts of ourselves. And I've known for a long time. And so IFS, or internal family systems, helped me to crystallize more. But I've always known I've a collage. You know that about me. If you said the various parts of cuckoo that make up what why my name Cuckoo fits, it's an interesting, fun, and challenging, and I might get defensive about some of the parts. I would get to it's the various parts of Ralph, or the various parts of Andrew, where when we see clients, when it's a true empathy, yeah, that's a part of me also. And it's not bullshit that you're trying to make like I'm the same as you, because if that goes on, I trust clients' ability frequently, almost always, to pick that up. When it's a true congruence and the parts are similar, there's a connection there that has always been looked at in the research in the therapy world as a joining that is right at the heart of what would make psychology work, or the mental health work, all the way back to Carl Rogers. I remember a movie that we used to be shown and still might be in training centers about, and Carl Rogers with two or three other guys, and and watching Carl Rogers, who was called non-directive, and when a client would say something he liked, he'd smile or shake his head, like, okay, like, oh, you're probably right because you're seeing it like I'm seeing it. Uh, so when a client and a therapist connect in congruence, whether it's anxiety, fear, depression, uh, whatever it is, and there's a connection that, yeah, empathy is such a huge part of it, that something special, not magic. Some people call it magical, and to clients it will frequently feel magical, like some of the stuff we do at PCS. When in psychodrama, on a regular basis, after I'd see somebody at 7 o'clock the next morning after one of the 2 days of psychodrama, and that'd be a word to be used. Oh, Susie's the name of one of the psychologists. Susie's magic. She does magic. Well, probably not. However, when there's a connection in the heart and in feelings, way more important than the connection in the intellectual side,
Yeah.
then something happens, because the client feeling and thinking, I am heard. And
Yeah.
and sometimes in therapy, that's one of the first times a person has ever really felt heard. And the task of the therapist, as I see it, is when we hear, and it the hearing comes from a part of us as therapists that may have a similar or not, but that really hears how that can be so validated. I know that when I've been the client, when I have felt validated, it's an incredible, it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say is that there's a difference between like an intellectual understanding of what someone's saying and like a heartfelt understanding, and that heartfelt understanding comes from our own parts and our own experiences, and that's that deep empathy where we can relate to someone's experience of anxiety, stuckness, depression, shame from our own lived experience. Even if we, none of us have had the exact same experience, right? But we have these deep similarities. And am I tracking with that?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, you are, Andrew. And I know that as a client, when I've been the client patient, and my therapist uh, shares may share a story that's similar, or even without a story. When the therapist has said to me, "Ralph, I get that, been there, done that," and I said, that's free. That frees me up. Like, okay, I'm not the only one. At least there are two of us, and we're here right.
Yeah.
There, and that's the genius of, like, at PCS, when people do intensive, half of it's group therapy. The freeing up in group therapy is to hear others who are similar enough. Doesn't have to be exact same story. That I don't feel like I'm weird, or I'm whatever, or I'm psychotic because I'm having some strange experience over and over again in group. For years, I was involved in leading co-leading three groups at 7 in the morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and over. It was interesting to me, and amazing at the beginning, but became less amazing when somebody would share a story that was seemed very different than most stories, and then that would enable somebody else in the room to say, "Oh yeah," and tell their story. And it's when stories, which to me is what therapy is all about, when stories are told and stories are heard, and a validation that I am not weird because of whatever it is, and then going back to what we talked about earlier, and understanding what my values are. If the story doesn't fit my own values, then what am I going to do about it? Because if I'm not, I have a conscience. I want to be congruent with myself. It's therapy is an amazing process, and it's currently at 86 very therapeutic to me. Well, this is here. I'm with my grandson. How old are you, Andrew?
20, 30, 20, 32. Feel 20.
Mama, Mama, my wife, your grandma, she would know the exact age. I'm not so good. Yes, but to be able to have this podcast with a male who means more to me than most males, being my grandson, and the experiences over the years that we've had.
Yeah.
Just uh, thanks for right now doing something as therapeutic for Cuckoo. I appreciate it.
No. Well, thank you for doing this and for speaking from the heart. That's really nice. And yeah, one thing I was curious about as you were talking there was you've received a lot of feedback from clients over the years at PCS and really seen what sticks and what's helpful for people. We talked there about that, the power of empathy, really connecting from your heart with someone else. Are there other pieces of, and you talked about the group piece too, of the normalization of an experience, and okay, I'm not so bad or weird, right? All these people are seeing me, and they all have similar experiences too, perhaps. Are there other pieces of like any sort of techniques, or any other pieces that over the years have been consistent with people's feedback about what was most helpful over the PCS intensive week for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Two things come to my mind real rapidly on that one. One is I'm going to say something that in many ways is obvious and yet not easily done, and that is a part of our training is to teach people to communicate better. I mean, that's, well, duh. And by the way, a lot of things are duh in a way, but we, it's difficult to communicate well. And so one of the big parts of an intensive or any kind of therapy at PCS uh, is like we call couples communication. There's a group called interpersonal communication that's come up with uh, communication skills that are researched in the field of couples therapy and family therapy as being working best pragmatically. So teaching, it's unlearning some things and learning some things. Unlearning, like on my part, to shut up and listen better. That's one of the things that's been the toughest thing for me to do, is shut up, listen, really listen. And I have understood that most in my relationship with my wife Glenda. We've been married 65 years. And as recently as in the last 24 hours, got worked on listening in a way where Glenda felt more heard. That's not always easy for me. I'm not going to say it. It definitely is difficult for me at times. And in my own marriage, when I really listen, it we're both winners.
Yeah.
I win. I like to win. So, so if by listening to what my wife Glenda, who I've been involved with now for 68 years, when she feels heard, and then she's comfortable with me and listens better, and I listen to her, it's feels like magic in a way, because it always works in our marriage, and it's frequently difficult for me to do. I'm sharing that because as a therapist, I found out I'm not the only one in the world who has that problem, and both on the man side and the woman's side. When Glenda listens to me, uh, that's the caring that counts. It's not about does she agree that it's something of politics, or is she? That's not. It's that she values what I who I am, and I value who she is. The other thing that comes to my mind is something that I've mentioned on a podcast before, a word we use called care fronting. I still think that in the therapy world, there's not enough confronting at times in the context of caring. So learning how to care and have empathy, I know that I've been helped most when I was a client or a patient. When somebody said, it's like a prophetic thing out of the Hebraic Bible, thou art the person, Ralph. You are, it's you. This is, unless you change this, Ralph, your marriage isn't going to work out as well. Unless you do this, Ralph. It's the people who have helped, who have loved me. If I don't feel loved or cared for, I don't, ears to hear. Who love me, and because of that love, were able to help me to be less defensive and hear what it is I need to hear to be a better deal for myself and others. So those are the things, kind of things that come to my mind. And at PCS, we work real hard at caring, without which there is no relationship that's going to really help, and real hard at confronting, not because I or any therapist at PCS has the answer, but because it's helping to create within the person the ability to to make some changes that are a better deal for that person.
Yeah. So that it starts with the foundation of that caring relationship and that empathy we've been talking about. And then from that, you found it's helpful when you can be somewhat confrontational. You found it helpful for you when people in your life have asked you to look inward. I mean, that really resonates with me, what you were saying. You're talking about your relationship with Mama, like the magic of listening. When I can just listen to my wife Natalie, it's a huge game changer, right? It becomes a win-win situation, whereas a part of me wants to just kind of focus outward and on how unfair I'm being treated, right? Kind of more of this victim posture. But how when I can, one, listen to myself and be with those parts of myself, I think that's huge. And then two, then listen to her and really hear what's going on for her, just the profound shifts. And then how helpful it is to when she or other people in my life too have out of that place of care invited me to look inward further, right? Encouraged me to connect with these parts of myself that I often don't look at, right? Because I maybe have another part of me that's angry with those parts. There's pain there, and I don't, at times want to look at that pain or re-experience that pain. But how when I do, then my parts kind of will relax a bit. The ones that want to just kind of point the finger, criticize, or not look inward, and then I can better love people around me. So that's what comes up for me as you were talking there, and I think those pieces are so important for it seems like a simple thing to care for someone, right? But it really is not, with the complexity of our inner worlds and the burdens we experience. So I think you're spot on there, with both as therapists, but then also just as people in relationships, right? As we have this level of responsibility to connect with ourselves so that we can bring that connection to others.
Yeah, Andrew, the right now on the international scene, Israelis and Arabs, it's tragic what's going on, with literally over 1,000 people on both sides being killed. Uh, Mama and I have been there. I've been there like 2 times and care deeply for the Arab side and for the Israeli side. And there's truth on both sides, and there's not truth on both sides, and the way it gets played out, and then killing, including babies beheaded now, and all that stuff that's going on. When it is an international story right now, in terms of not listening and being, from my point of view, being defensive about I'm right, you're wrong, when there's right and wrong on both sides, and it's
Yeah.
amazing, and the caring that can go on in a therapy room, one-on-one or in group therapy. Sometimes the other clients, frequently the clients are more helpful to another client than the therapist. When you using words you just used, when spot on, the empathy is so amazingly the same deal, and somebody who's helped to work it through can provide hope. Because in the therapy world, the first book I ever wrote was for Simon and Schuster, and I'm mentioning that because a friend of mine had written a book called Hope. I've got 2 copies of it still here. Written this, and that was a big seller. The word hope is one of the things that PCS and other therapists work hard at doing, is giving hope. Sometimes when there's very little hope, maybe in the area of suicidal kinds of things, the person will say there's no hope, and to instill some hope that has a direction that when I follow that plan, or that it's like an internal GPS that gets helpful, that the person has to instill in himself or herself, that starts moving. Say, and I know for me, one of the most exciting times always in therapy was when somebody would say, I, I've got some hope. They're not saying I'm cured, because I don't think there is such a thing as a cure when it comes to the kinds of things we're talking about. And to help patients to realize that, by the way, your dad is great at this. Dr. Marcus Earle is great at making sure that person doesn't, oh, I've arrived. Your dad's one of the really a role model for me as well in therapy of, no, it's not an endpoint. It's a journey, and the journey inward is the toughest journey. We frequently hear at PCS, the real tiredness is that there's nothing more tiring than really doing therapy. I believe that people who are workaholics or laborers physically, whatever, but people who work out a lot. Okay, this is even more tiring to let my mind get into areas that are internal conflicts. Oh, okay, to deal with the internal family systems, some of which are at war with each other, is a very tiring process.
Yeah. And you were talking, there's a few points I'm really drawn to with what you're talking about, but first the hope. What have you found is most helpful in cultivating that person's experience of hope, or like what conditions? How do you go about that with someone? Is someone's just so stuck for years and years and years. They've maybe been experiencing trauma, abuse, and they've just kind of gone inwards, and they're just saying there's no point to life, right? I'm so much pain all the time, and the extreme firefighter and internal family systems language is saying I'm just going to kill this person. I'm going to kill myself because I can take away that pain. That's really the option, right? Maybe there's a few things that my dog or a friend, that I kind of want to stay alive for, but it's just not worth it, right? Like how, I mean, I'm sure there's a big answer to this question, but how do you hold that person and support them and get in touch with hope?
Yeah, I love what you just using the word answer to the question. I don't think there is an answer to the question. It's that so part of it is destroying that kind of mythology that there is an answer. Because if somebody's looking for the answer, that can lead to addictions of all kinds. That okay, in our case of PCS, we deal with an area called sex addiction or alcohol or drug. The answer, and when okay, and I'm going to say it. I'm an ordained minister, and somebody thinks, well, God is the answer, and and it gets carried away with that one. That can be as addictive and non-helpful as almost any other addiction. And what's going on right now in the Middle East, in the name of God, in the name of Allah, in the name of Jehovah, wait a second, killing in the name of. So the hope thing to me, group therapy, I believe is as helpful as individual therapy, because in the group process, when somebody hears someone else and say, "Oh, gee, that is I," that is as much as I've ever heard anybody be, and uh, and I wouldn't want you to die. By the way, processing group therapy, I've never in group had a group member. I mean, and there's enormous integrity in the groups that are really functioning well. Somebody saying, "Well, the answer I have, I hope you don't have the same answer." That helps, because I don't want you to have that answer. I want you to live. And here's somebody we've had this happen many times. Somebody who's suicidal, letting the group know that that's where he or she at the moment is, and somebody else brings up that, and this person all of a sudden becomes No, no, don't do that. And then when asked the question, um, the double standard. I'm willing to allow me to do something that makes no sense for anybody else I know to do, unless the person's homicide would be an exception. And what is that all about? And then it gets to the value question, Andrew. Again, do I value myself as much as others? And frequently the answer is no, I don't. I value others more than I value myself. And just looking at uh, the part of from an internal family system, the part of me that where did I learn not to value myself? Where did that part come from? Where did I and the amazing stories that come up in terms of family of origin, crises, whatever, to help a person to because most people in therapy would say, yeah, it makes sense for me to value me. I don't.
Yeah.
So discovering the origins, looking back, can't change the origins, can't change that. And then again, from my point of view, Andrew, the double standard of I literally would not want anybody else in this group to commit suicide, and I'm thinking about doing it. What's wrong with that picture? What the hell does that mean?
So
So
would
hope. I'm sorry, but hope doesn't spring eternal. That's a myth. And that doesn't help. I mean, because then if it, I mean, because people think, well, I'm really weird because hope is springing. Hope should spring eternal. Should. Depression, by the way, is never about shoulds. It is about what is and what and what one of the things we frequently have people do is I would ask somebody in the group to pick somebody else in the group as if that person is you and you be the therapist right now and talk to that person as to why about who is depressed or suicidal. You talk to that person. You have enormous insight into it because you yourself have that challenge. Maybe, probably, you can help that person in some ways I can't. Ralph, at the moment, and that kind of thing. But engendering hope is a big part of therapy.
yeah. And yeah, I love what you're saying is there's not just like a clear direction to in inspiring hope. It's not this like just do A B C D and then that equals hope. It's
Yeah. Oh, if there were such a thing, I'd like to be the one that has it, and I'd very, very helpful, and I'd be very wealthy.
yeah. And how viewing viewing things as there is this one thing that will bring hope, right? This one thing that will be the answer, whether that's religion, whether that's a process addiction, any sort of addiction, is in and of itself problematic and a part of that problematic pattern. And yeah, just I love what you keep on pointing to the power of group therapy, and I think like what you're speaking to with that example of inviting one of the group members to like be the therapist of someone else, right? I mean, that's so powerful because yeah, their lived experience, maybe contending with suicide, if you the therapist have not, could powerfully impact that person in ways that you as the therapist with your lived experience could. So I think you're spot on with the power of group therapy there.
Well, it's group. Um, I would tell people in groups that this is as helpful. Not bullshit. This is as helpful to me. This group today was as helpful for me, I think, as to anybody in the room, and it helped other you've all said. So I call it a spiritual experience. I don't call it a religious experience. I call it a spiritual experience to feel so connected, which I do as when I'm a leader, to feel so connected to what's going on in me and going on in you. So again, I'm going to use the word hope, that provides hope that um, I'm putting books into a library here. I'm trying to figure what books to get rid of in my life and what books to keep. And a book by a friend of mine, Tom Harris was his name, I'm Okay, You're Okay. I still like that title. Tom was onto something. I'm okay, you're okay, and it's because we're both okay, and the okay does not mean I'm not going to be depressed. Okay doesn't mean I'll never be suicidal. Okay doesn't mean whatever. Andrew, I had a heart attack, and I remember being in New York 5 years ago for 6 weeks in the hospital, and I remember not caring if I lived or not. I'd never had that experience before. uh, I didn't care because it was where I was in the moment. For me, uh, I'm not glad I had a heart attack. And by the way, my heart, according to cardiologists, is in good shape. But it helped me to understand depression, situational depression, in a way I never understood it before. A lot of things have come pretty quickly for me, professionally and all. And all. That experience is was a gift to me to understand, to not just think, oh, okay, I can't be in your shoes, or have to understand not caring whether I lived or not in a way that nobody else's story helped me. So I think the group therapy, when people share experiences and talk about what they think they would never tell anybody, and they tell it. And it's been so common in my experience in group therapy where somebody would say, I was going to take it to the grave. I never was going to share this with anybody. And then, if also, then somebody else has, oh, yeah, okay, you did that. That empowered, I need to say, you're not the only one. The humanness that has tears and joy. We tend to so much, and a mistake a therapist can make is to just want to talk about the joy part when the part, one of the most meaningful parts of my life is when I was in that bed in New York Presbyterian, and I didn't care, and I felt lonely. I didn't think, well, nobody cared, Mama doesn't care. That wasn't it. It's just that I didn't care. And so the storytelling, that's what makes like AA and 12-step groups powerful, when people tell the story. So I'm an enthusiast for sharing stories. When the stories are the human condition, which includes uh, diametrically different parts uh, of us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that experience, and it seems like those moments where we are so intimately connected with people, use the word spirituality there, it just comes, it's like if there ever could be a purpose for like pain and suffering and shame and loneliness, perhaps it's that it provides opportunity for us to like connect so intimately with people around us who are having those similar experiences. It it is so profound when you can connect with someone from that deep pain, that deep suffering. And I'm curious to hear more of your understanding of spirituality. I know that's a big part of the work at PCS, and your personal experiences as well, I'm sure, have really informed how you view spirituality. But wondering if you could talk a bit about what spirituality has looked like for you.
Yeah, I can't think of a word that hits deeper inside me. I was brought up by two parents who were religious, ordained ministers. My dad was chair of a committee put together the current best-selling Bible, the New International Version. Um, um, I was brought up about what not to do in order to make it to heaven, or I'd go to hell. That's the background I grew up in. And um, what's happened in the evolution of Ralph, thanks for asking, is I don't know if there's a heaven or hell. I know I don't know. But it's not knowing and loving not knowing that's changed in me. Whereas I had two parents who knew, quote unquote, they knew. I remember I'm 86 now, a 45th birthday party at our house, and your parents were there, and a lot of folks were there, and we had a celebration. And some people who sat at the table with my dad and mom, but both of them are dead now, said that. Uh, I remember one close friend saying, "I don't know whether we should tell you this or not, Ralph, but we're sitting at a table with your dad, and unless we talked about religion, when we talked about God or religion, he'd light up and he'd talk. He didn't, nothing else seemed to matter." Well, I was actually taught that. I mean, one favorite term from my dad was only what's done for Christ will last. And what that meant is sports are a waste of, other things are a waste of time. Well, I waste a lot of time these days in various ways, according to God's way of doing it. And to be freed up to seek connection with other people as what spirituality is about. One of the things that the therapist gets to do is hear stories that most people don't hear from a person, and to be able to connect and get the inside information. It's not like some made up story. Here's this guy right in front of me, and the therapist doesn't say, "You did what?" The therapist say, "Okay, yeah, you did this. We did this," and to to get a grasp of what it really means when somebody authentically tells on themselves, authentically. And I know in my life, one of the most freeing things for me is when I've authentically talked to, and for me, it's not just therapists, it's but friends, it's my wife. To those are the moments that really count. And as much as I like other things, I like sports, I like whatever. It's compared to that world's trivial. And we would experience frequently at PCS somebody who's um, professionally or business wise very well known, who has never been known by himself or herself down deep and had never shared the stuff that is what really counts in their lives. And what we frequently would hear is that when it comes to adrenaline inside, when it comes to feeling like that I really count, I I I feel that more now than I have felt when I got whatever accolades or achievement. And it's the your podcast. You do it. I'm biased, and I'm also trying to be as real as I know how to be. Andrew, you have a way of bringing out in me, and I've heard this from some other people who've done podcasts with you. Uh, the inside, you bring the inside out a lot, and so when when the person you're interviewing, me now, or anybody else, and when that resonates with people who are listening, who may have some fears about the inside coming out, to be able to realize that I need to do that, and I need to have some people, and ideally one of those people. Uh, Mama and I have an appointment to see our therapist coming up, who's up actually. Well, we won't be seeing him. He's in Scottsdale, Arizona, a psychiatrist that we have an appointment with again for an hour and a half coming up in a few weeks, because those are spiritual moments. And when I mention group therapy for me being spiritual, it's because of the sameness within people opening up and saying, "This is what I'm scared about. This is what," and the listening of several ears um, is way more spiritual to me than some kind of a code or a litmus test about theology. That doesn't mean much to me, and I'm still an ordained minister in a denomination called the United Church of Christ. But a litmus test about theology just doesn't cut it for me.
Yeah. It's it's yeah, I think it's this theme of what we've been talking about throughout this podcast of uh both being authentic yourself in your relationships, and then when others trust you enough to share their fears, share their suffering, that's spirituality for you. It's that deep human connection. Um, and that's, like some of those clients were saying, it's more profound than any accolade you could get. It's just being with person and their suffering, or sharing your suffering with that other person and them being with you.
Yeah, Andrew, it's been amazing because we see a lot of people at PCS. We see some of the clients we see literally when they're in the room, everybody knows who they are because and what that person says in a group uh, shows caring for others and says this is more meaningful to me than whatever the accolade might be, whether it's a sports figure or whatever it is. Whoever the person is, that carries some meaning to everybody in the room, because what is it that really counts, that gives me hope in my life? And it's certainly not some kind of I mean, almost everybody's aware it's not about how much money I have. It's not about whatever the accolade would be. And I know in my own life that the moments when somebody has loved me even more, knowing the worst things about me. I'm going to say it that way. Somebody who's loved me even more, knowing the worst things about me, is a healing conversation that beats the heck out of somebody saying, "Oh yeah, great, you got to whatever," and just hearing and experiencing that over and over again, as a therapist can do in group therapy. So I'm not suggesting everybody become therapists, by the way. And I'm not suggesting. I am suggesting uh, that any of us being congruent and open can be as helpful as any therapist can be, clinically trained or certified or whatever, can be in the moment when we are that way with ourselves and that way with another person.
Mm. Well, and that's a hopeful message there. uh, it's like the most meaningful stuff in life is free, right? We don't have to go seek these peak experiences or try to, achieve this or that, but we like really all have the opportunities and the capacity over time to drop in with people authentically, and you don't have to be an expert, right? Like you can just start tomorrow, just try to remember to just listen a little bit more, like we were talking about, to a family member, to a friend, and yeah, those are the moments, for me too, that are just our most spiritual, is when someone is really vulnerable with me, or vice versa, I'm really vulnerable with them, and we're just sitting there together. And that was so profound what someone has said to you of I I see you and I love you more because of what you just shared with me. This part maybe that you are fearful to share with someone, and then you develop that trust with them. You share that, and that is that's a spiritual moment.
Yeah, we see that in couples therapy a lot. I'm sure you've experienced that as a couples therapist. I've experienced it that when in some areas, including sex, it's something we call full disclosure over and over. Uh, when I've experienced that when a couple, both people share what they most are afraid to share, what usually happens is, and if the relationship's going to make sense in the future, would happen if it's the right, if the people are making going to make any sense in their lives together. Sharing stories that people are fearful about is one of the biggest connectors there can be, and it's a again, I've experienced that over and over, and I've experienced that in my own marriage. At a time when the thing I shared with Glenda, Mama, you're the toughest thing I could possibly share. And what Glenda tells me is not I'm glad you did what you did, Ralph. That what she does say is that's when we really began to get married because of the honesty and the reality of what's going on. And it's so I'm a I'm a I grew up in a church where people would testify. They were praying. My testimony is that honesty is the best policy in a relationship. And if the honesty were to lead to the ending of a relationship, then maybe the relationship needs to end. If honesty leads to a deeper intimacy, I want to use that word, uh, then great, because most of us have the ingredients to um, become more intimate. And to me, the one of the best recipes. I know you're into nutrition, and I know Natalie's into nutrition. That one of the main ingredients nutritionally for a marriage is honesty. And and I do tell couples that when I'm not doing couples therapy now. So many times, to somebody who's fearful, if being honest leads to the marriage ending, maybe the marriage doesn't make sense. If being honest leads to a deepening and a re-choosing or choosing to stay married with that, then um, yeah, then that's a good deal.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And do you think that there ever is a time for not sharing something, maybe withholding a piece of information in a given moment? Like some might view that as dishonesty, is not sharing an
Oh,
important piece in a given moment.
Andrew, yes, I do. Uh, so I'm glad. I'm really glad you asked that. I'm not suggesting that it's not my belief that always telling everything makes sense. And I'm having a hard time at the moment coming up with an example of when it doesn't. But I mean, if it were to jeopardize a situation that where bad things are going to happen because of it, it's definitely not. If it's going to be something that is injurious to the person being shared, deep into the person shared, absolutely. There are times when it doesn't make sense within a particular situation. Sure. So the whole idea of thank you. Yeah. their example. I remember ethics class way back in college, which for me was like 1954, freshman year of the ethics class. A situation like this is what I remember, Andrew, is an ethics class at this place called Pasadena Nazarene College, and the thing was that it was talking about the time during the war with Hitler. And the issue was if some a Nazi comes to this is the way it was done by this book, come to a door and says, "Is your sister there?" They want to kill her. Like, okay, oh yeah,
She's out back.
hey, lie. Thank you for that clarification, because I have known in some situations where sharing turned out to be destructive to the whole situation. Thank you.
And how, I mean, maybe there's just not an answer to this question. It's just gray area, but some scenarios like that would seem pretty obvious, right? You're not gonna tell the Nazis where your sister is, right? You're gonna lie to preserve life. And I'm hearing, like, with the other piece you're talking about in an intimate couple relationship over a period of time, it just makes, I'm hearing it makes sense most of the time to be honest. If you're hiding something from your significant other year after year, especially, in the addiction world, I know that that's something that's seen common, is trying to hide the addiction or a part of us, maybe hiding a fear that we have. I guess would you say that's true then, that there's just kind of like this gray case by case with how honest to be in a given relationship and situation?
Sure. I think we live in a life of grays, by the way. So, yes. And that's where I think that group therapy, um, uh, collaboration is really important to talk about, with somebody, because there are people who have, in certain areas, are people who have more wisdom about what I need to do than in certain situations than I have. And having that humility that, okay, I don't know what to do, collaborating. And I'm blessed with some really close friends, Andrew, that I do collaborate with. And when I need to collaborate, and they with me. And so it's absolutely realizing that life is full of a lot of gray moments that either need to lead to shutting up and not sharing, or sharing, and not to, um, that if I make that decision on my own all the time, I'm probably going to be in deep trouble. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Is the importance of community and making those big decisions, maybe around a big disclosure with a significant other, with trusted people, having them give feedback and input on the situation.
Yeah, when at PCS, one of the things always, before there's what we call full disclosure, there's both people, if it's a couple, meet with therapists to look at that disclosure. And there have been times when certain things just would not make sense because of what the person who's hearing is going to do with it, especially if it's not. It's a complicated deal. So I'm so glad that you. I love the words most of the time.
Yeah.
Applying that to our lives, that there's no, like, this is it, the holy grail. No, it's not that simple. And that would be a dogmatism that doesn't work. And there
Yeah.
are people who preach dogmatisms. That's dogmatism is not therapeutic.
Yeah. And it's that seems like another theme of this conversation is living in the gray and kind of stepping away from that dogmatism within the context of psychotherapeutic relationships, certainly. And And another, like, I was thinking back to something you said earlier that really leapt out at me too, is with like significant others. I think you're talking about Mama listening to you. Like, she doesn't have to agree with you, right? Like, when we listen to
Sure.
someone, we don't have to agree with everything they're saying, but we can still honor their perspective, right? And we can still really listen and understand what they're saying, even if we don't disagree with them. Because it's, I know I have a part of myself that is very dogmatic, wants to see the world black and white. It kind of, I think this part of me provides a level of like certainty and like safety, and that's nice. And at the same time, it's damaging in my relationships, and kind of exhausting when it's just thinking this is the way, let me figure this out, right? And I think a lot of us in our culture have a part of ourselves that is similar to the part that I have. So yeah, I'm currently in the process of just getting to know myself better and better. And I love, like, it seems like, if I was hearing you right, you're saying you're 86 years old and you're still getting to know yourself. You're still in this journey of not being perfect and not having things all figured out.
That would be putting it mildly. Understated. Andrew, I'll share with you that Mama and I, we're now in Maine, and and we're in a community called Piper Shores. That's the only total care communities called in the state of Maine. So we are in independent living. We're in a house now and here we have memory care. We have assisted living, and we so choosing new primary care doctor. So Mama, I met with this doctor in a nearby town here in Maine. And I forget, I was trying to think what the word was he used, but basically what he was saying to us is, you're both pretty stubborn, aren't you? And the better, really nail. I said, okay, diagnostically, yes. Okay, since we are whatever the word was, since Mam and I are both stubborn, the relationship would break if we didn't listen. And it's certainly not. There's no way. Oh, no way. We're going to always agree with each other. That would be somebody what we call codependent, or just checking in and not being. So, not to worry. We and the Mama has told me at times, like, Ralph, you want me to be like you are. I mean, that's close to a quote. And no, I really don't. So, and when I act that way, so that she's hearing it that way, um, I'm a loser, because first of all, it's not going to happen, and it's a good thing it wouldn't have. And it's so this flexibility is, to me, such a key word. Uh, if any marriage is not flexible, probably going to break. Marriage is, for me anyway, a great learning experience, and if because I the person I'm married to is the person that I care for the most, other than myself. Exclamation mark about that. And if I don't stay flexible, which goes against one of the part of me that's very inflexible, then guess what? So yeah, flexibility, and I I am learning more that um, I'm becoming more flexible. But however, I have no goal of being total. Oh yeah, everything you say is right. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, sure. Well, Kuku, it's been such a nice conversation. We're getting towards the end of the interview here, and I usually finish the podcast by asking what's a message of hope that you'd like to leave the listeners with. We've talked a lot about hope, so I don't know if there is a specific message that you would want to leave the listener with today around hope.
Well, what comes to my mind is going back to the word values. That if the hope and belief that the more I value myself. Marilyn Murray, who's on our staff at PCS, has been incredibly helpful in terms of the spiritual side and me making that I do count. And any message that comes from religion or anywhere that would say I don't count, it's not okay. And because I count, so I'm okay, you're okay, I count, you count, that keeps me knowing to myself that, hey, I really do count. So for me, the hope would be that having that be firm and not rigid, assertive but not aggressive.
Uh-huh.
And it is can help us not to break ourselves or break a relationship.
Well, that's a great message to leave with. That if you listen this far, we give you gift of the message that you count, you matter, just as we do. So that's really nice. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast today, Kuku.
Hey, I love you and I love doing this with you. So thanks, Andrew.
Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.